All right. So, hello. It's really nice to formally meet your face. And
Likewise.
the first question that I emailed you was about your profession, actually. Could you tell the class about what you do? And I think, like right now, specifically what you do is very relevant to their topic, too. So, yeah.
Yeah, sure. So I work for a conservation land acquisition nonprofit called the Conservation Fund. And in layman's terms, what that is basically it's a nonprofit like real estate. Like we focus on real estate primarily, but specifically for conservation, land conservation acquisitions. And then we have smaller programs within the organization that are connected to the sort of land acquisition work. And so in my program, we're not doing a ton of the land acquisition. We do some of it, but that's not the bulk of my work. What we do though is we specifically work in urban communities of color that typically are struggling with community development and urban blight. And we work with community groups and community leaders to either redesign and redevelop a park that's already there and has kind of been like abandoned by like municipal entities really managing it and stewarding it. Or if there isn't a park or green space, we help the community decide like where it would be the most strategic to have one, and what they want that park design to be like. So what I primarily focus on in that program is I'm a project manager, and what I do is, well, a lot of things. I'm kind of a jack of a lot of trades, which works for me in my ADHD mindset. So I spend a lot of time working, well, to back up a little bit, I think a part of the reason why they chose me to be a project manager in this team, first of all, is that like my organization realized that working in Black and Brown communities and having no people of color on the team was problematic. And so when they hired me and my coworker Kelsey, they strategically were looking for, environmental professionals of color who were experienced in sort of community organizing, community development, environmental justice, those sorts of things. And so I have spent a lot of time in both my professional, academic, and personal life sort of doing a lot of environmental justice advocacy work. So my expertise in terms of our team has really been focusing on making sure that we really are having it as equitable a community engagement process as we can, and making sure that we're trying to design community engagement processes that are the most accessible, particularly to the most like vulnerable community members in the surrounding neighborhoods of where the park project will be. So yeah, I am very strategic with thinking about those things. So like thinking about how we're having community engagement events, making sure that we're paying community members for their time, either in resource or stipends. But then also I'm doing sort of the like boring administrative things like writing grant agreements and processing the checks for those grant agreements and organizing webinars and doing social media like content creation for our page. So it's great for me in that I get to sort of do a lot of different things. So I'm never super bored, but the other side of that coin is that it's very easy for me to get into cycles of burnout, just because there's a lot of tasks. And sometimes it's a challenge because we are a small team and we work remotely to figure out sort of what things to prioritize at the moment. And two, whenever, if you guys want to see, I can always share my screen. I've got some of our one-pagers about the different cities, but honestly, I think it's, from my perspective, it's more valuable to just like talk about the role and how ESF allowed me to transition into this role than like going deep into my program. Like y'all can all do, like, I'm not here to cheerlead my program, but more to talk to you guys about like, I don't know, the transition between school and professional life. But if you want me to do any of that, I can also. I'm here for you guys, so whatever you want.
No, feel free to actually share that with us. That would be very beneficial for all of us to see it. And you can also talk about ESF and how it prepares you, or some things that you wish you like took at ESF that could have been better for your new like for your career path rather.
Yeah. So in all reference, I've got your questions pulled up right here. So
I can mute you also.
I would say that ESF prepared me surprisingly more than I anticipated that it would. Particularly because I got my Master of Science in Environmental Studies, and I loved studying all of the coursework in my degree program, and I loved that I had the flexibility to sort of choose what was relevant to me in terms of what my thesis was. But I will say that I was really anxious when I graduated about how the things that I was passionate about would actually translate into a job that was A, sustainable, and B, that I wouldn't be bored with. So I was just like, well, at least I followed my passion or whatever, but I mean, it's anyone's guess if I'll actually get a job. And surprisingly, as you guys can see, I got a job that actually was kind of strangely, beautifully tailor-made to sort of the systems thinking approach that the environmental studies degree really prepared me for. So a lot of the sort of policy and governance work that I studied, the environmental communications work, all of that sort of, I really do, it has been really helpful in my toolkit in terms of how I do my work, particularly because, we're kind of, the work that I do really is at the intersection of working with municipal partners, so I spend a lot of time working with, parks departments, watershed departments or stormwater management departments, public works departments, because you have to sort of deal with all of those to have a park project, obviously. And as I'm sure you guys possibly have learned, community engagement processes from bureaucratic institutions come with a lot of challenges to really having equitable engagement processes. And so it's great that we can come in as a municipal partner to sort of play a role where we can have more flexibility to do a better job at having a deeper dive in robust community engagement. But at the same time, because these bureaucrats are used to a certain mindset about what community engagement means, and because the projects are on their property, it's really a dance of building relationships for them to trust us enough to let us sort of steer the ship in what community engagement looks like. So that, a lot of the ESF coursework really did sort of prepare me for thinking about those challenges. I think for me personally, what I had to learn is that in transitioning from academy and being a very sort of theoretical, radical, theory-minded person, I had to learn to keep that in check and learn that it's one thing to sort of see through the veil of how things are structured and what's going on with them, but to understand that pragmatically to get things done, we don't live in sort of a socialist anarchic utopia. And so in order to have the most the best outcomes for the communities at hand, you have to sort of choose your battles. And that was something I really have had to learn professionally from transitioning out of school into the professional world and out of working volunteering for more advocacy, grassroots oriented organizations into ones that are not necessarily in the advocacy lane, but have kind of a broader context for the kind of work that we do. I see someone ask what my favorite part about the job is. I would say one of my favorite parts of the job is that I do get to actually apply the things that I'm interested in. So I get to learn about, like, I get to, in a in like real world circumstances, apply all this like urban sustainability systems thinking that I've like studied for 6+ years. So that for me, I'm like very action oriented as a person, so like getting to actually like navigate the world with that skill set. And I feel like my generation was probably the first at which like sustainability thinking really was like becoming a field where like students were going through programs of that. And so it's great to actually be like applying those skill sets. But I think the challenge is that like a lot of the older professionals in this field have not, like, maybe they've caught up, they know the buzzwords of sustainability, but like really getting a hold of systems thinking is still like on the vanguard of the field, I feel like. But my other favorite part, I think, is like really the community connections. Like I have really deeply rooted like friendships and like professional relationships and partnerships with a lot of really great Black-led environmental organizations and community leaders. And I think the reason why I can do my job so proficiently is that I build trust in a way that's authentic and that community members like can feel and know. And I look to them for guidance. I don't like see myself as an expert just because I'm managing a project. It really is sort of a dialogue for me. And because I am working in these cities where, other than the DC work, I'm not there on the ground, and it's like I'm new to the communities, I really have to look to them, the community members and organizations, as the experts, because it's their hood, it's not mine. Like I can understand the basics of how, like, the things that I've learned about how like community processes work broadly, but I really look to a lot of the community leaders and particularly the community elders to sort of get their thoughts and opinions about like what works and what doesn't. But doing that sort of stuff, the relationship building and applying the systems thinking, are probably my favorite part. Oh, and the last thing is that I get to sort of, not as much as I want, but to a certain extent, I get to do creative things. Like we don't have an in-house photographer. Well, we have a marketing and communications team, but because like the Conservation Fund is a national organization, but that is very decentralized. So even though we have national resources, our marketing and communications team is developing content for all of the programs, which there's a lot, because we have a staff of close to 200. And so we're producing a lot of the content ourselves, which I personally like because I get to like take a lot of pictures with, the staff Canon camera. And I get to sort of like write blog posts and, do the sort of creative things that I like to do in my personal life for my job. So that is pretty cool also.
All right. So yeah, I'll go on to one of the next questions. About COVID-19, how that has like kind of affected your work today, and like just how has that been for you working?
So as I was saying, I think before we officially started class, was the most challenging aspect has really been figuring out the ways to be the most adaptive and accessible to our community members and community groups. And full disclosure, it's a challenge even when before COVID-19, to get community members to participate in our community events and activities and design workshops for the park projects. A lot of times because we are working in like low income Black and brown urban communities, there's a lot of distrust between the community members and the municipalities, understandably. And so it takes a lot of time to build trust and to distinguish like the Conservation Fund and Parks with Purpose from the municipalities, because when they see park project and it's on a city property, they just think the city. And so, before COVID-19 stuff, it already was really challenging to get, to grow out our community participation to sort of have a, statistically valid like percentage of participation. And so that's only exacerbated by not being able to sort of have boots on the ground, like canvassing and like having physical community event activities, has really challenged us. For example, so we have our project in Raleigh is actually at the design phase right now. And so we were going to have a physical community event where we're going to tally up all of the votes. So we've got like a website that has the 2 design options, but we had a bunch of strategies where we were going to get community members to sort of weigh in their votes and drive people to the website, but also physically take votes from people in the neighborhood and canvas with tablets and ask people to choose and do all these like innovative things. But now that obviously we're constrained by physical contact, we're trying to think of really innovative ways to sort of still engage people and stick to our like time scale as much as possible. Because from the construction side, the COVID situation is ideal in that like we can still push forward like a bunch of the construction aspect of the design once the design is chosen. But in order to feel like we can authentically say we had a community engagement process that was equitable, we need people to weigh in. So that has been really challenging. As of now, I had a meeting this morning. We only had 2 people who visited the website and voted. So I'm just like, yikes. So that, I think, just like figuring out how to adapt when we're so much of our work is steeped in that like person to person community engagement has been really challenging. But beyond that, like I typically work remotely, so like in terms of the like workspace environment, it hasn't affected me negatively. And on a positive note, I'll say I've gotten to spend more time doing a deeper dive in focusing on our like web content and organizing webinars and sort of spending time on our like marketing and communication materials that we really do need to spend time on, but often I won't get time to spend on because I'm doing the sort of like pragmatic aspects of project management. So that it's been positive to get to spend time actually developing that stuff out.
All right. So this is all really great. I really love everything about your job, everything that you're doing. This is really like insightful. So I'm gonna, yeah, no, thank you. I'm actually gonna open the questions up to the class to see if anybody else have any questions. Feel free to put your camera or your mic on.
I do see one question we didn't address, which I had thought about before this, is you asked that if there's something I wish I knew or should have done before graduating that would have been helpful for my career or for higher education. I've really been like sort of chewing on that a little bit. And I'll say one thing that I wish I had known is that, so like I was pretty sure that I wasn't gonna stay in academia, at least not immediately after. Like I molded over. I really love studying. I love school. I love theory. I love writing. But I think the challenging thing for me is the competitiveness of how the institution is structured now, especially with like developing publications and that being so tied to sort of like whether you can see yourself getting tenure and just like the struggles of being a working student and like mapping out what that trajectory would look like. And so I think even though I was pretty sure I wasn't immediately going to go into a PhD program, I felt a lot of pressure in grad school to be developing my thesis for publication. But I didn't really understand how to do that. And I think I spent a lot of emotional energy feeling very anxious about like feeling like my time spent at ESF should be really focused on creating a product at the end of my thesis that would be published, that would show that I like am legitimately an academic and academic researcher and intellectual. And when that didn't happen, I was just sort of like, what did I spend this time doing? And like, and just like feeling very insecure about like comparing myself to like other students in my program and in ESF in general, and feeling really frustrated about like having a different mindset, being in the humanities side of ESF, as I'm sure all of you have probably observed for yourself at ESF campus. Like, there definitely is a divide between the physical sciences and the humanities. And for those of you who are focusing on humanities-oriented studies and or policy, I think it's still the black sheep. I don't know how it is now because it's been a minute since I was at ESF, but at least when I was there was kind of this tension between the historical sort of natural science, natural resources oriented, like environmental management type mindset, and then the sort of like policy humanities focus. And I felt like I like needed to push up against that. And I wish that I had known that like in the real world, at least for me, like understanding that it's okay for there to be for me to see that tension like cognitively, but also to know that like it doesn't have to be a battle of values. And that like I think why I have been so successful in my career is that I've been able to sort of convince people who are very sort of like technical minded in their field in natural resources to sort of understand why like social emotional like connections to people, community, other departments and interdependence, like why that's really important, and why like being specialized isn't necessarily a strength. Like I think we've been indoctrinated to think into thinking that like and I think academy really reinforces this notion a lot of times that being very specialized is the way to be the most strategic, is to become very hyper specialized in a field and to find a niche and then like use that as your sort of selling point. And actually what I learned is that like being in the humanities and having a more like broad systems thinking perspective actually has made me the most adaptive and resilient in terms of being able to have fit into a lot of like professional contexts rather than being boxed into one very specialized field where I'm competing with a whole sea of overeducated, underemployed people. So I think just like I wish that I had known, and I feel like Sharon probably told me this in terms of advising me, but sometimes you don't learn until you learn for yourself, that I would be okay, and that like if I sort of like focused on what I felt passionate about, which is sort of systems thinking and the interconnections between these things, that I would be able to like, it's more important to find something where it fits into your skill set and to not try and like fit yourself into a mold that like isn't the best for like how you can work the most efficiently and sustainably. And that like being specialized, like that's okay, but you don't have to necessarily feel an anxiety about doing that in order to like have professional options that are sustainable, is something that I wish I had known.
Very good advice and insight. Thank you for sharing.
Mm-hmm. No problem.
Anything?
Oh, and having a good advisor. That's the last thing I'll say, is having a good advisor. Like I always said this when I was a fellow and I had a cohort of undergraduate students, I definitely emphasized to them that making sure that your advisor is actually working for you is very important, because, and especially at the undergraduate level, like there's a lot to take in. And if you don't have someone who is sort of strategically helping you to see where the intersection of your passions and your intuitive strengths come together, you're kind of like, you're you're doing yourself a disservice, you know, if you're not taking advantage of like why it's structured for you to have an advisor at all in the first place.
All right. Does anybody else have any questions?
How much is natural science a part of my job? So it's a fair point. It's a large part of my job. I'll say particularly in our program, we focus a lot on like watershed health and watershed ecology, and then green infrastructure, and sort of explaining those concepts to community members and organizations that are like maybe community development focused and are interested in our project but aren't environmental focused. So I would say it's a fair part of my job, but not in a technical sense. Like I think that I spend a lot of time translating, both from municipal partners, like technical science and natural resource related partners, translating from them to community and vice versa. So having the skill set to understand, to do technical analysis, to read through like policy papers, to read through sort of things that are happening on a municipal level, like decision making wise, because a lot of that stuff is framed in a way so that it is gatekeeping for only technical experts and managers to actually give a shit and or participate. And so my role is I see my role as being the translator to community members and putting things in layman's terms, and like not telling them that they should or shouldn't participate, because at the end of the day, it's anyone's guess whether their vote will matter, but at least doing the due diligence of translating to them like what the decision option is. And then if they want to weigh in, it's their decision to or not. So in that respect, I think natural science does play a big role. It's being able to sort of comprehend and understand and translate, but not really implementing sort of like natural history or natural science policy or sort of data collection or any of that. Did that answer the question? No problem.
All right, so it is 1:33, and if anybody has to leave the chat, I encourage you to do so. And if anyone has any more questions, I also encourage you to ask more, if you don't mind, Stacia.
Yeah, I'm here for you guys. I'm lucky enough to have schedule flexibility, so if anyone has any questions, please take advantage. I'll give you the real talk.
I'll jump in while we're waiting for a student. So just like in a minute or so, I know that you probably were acquainted with all those environmental statutes when you got going in your job, you know, Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, Superfund, brownfields. Did it matter, or could you have learned it on the job?
Ooh, I could have learned it on the job, but it would have taken a lot more conceptual energy. And the reality is, I'll tell you, when I first started this job, I felt very anxious about figuring out how much like in-depth knowledge of different ongoing sort of regulatory things at the federal, state, and municipal level, right? Because I'm working among multiple cities and there's multiple levels of policy that could potentially impact our projects and that, you know, could be important or valuable for community members to know. And so when I first started, just because I am like have this tendency towards perfectionism and was like, it's my diligence to sort of like make my like academic career worthwhile by like knowing all the things and then translating it to everyone. And then I quickly realized that it's just not possible, even for people who have to sort of understand policy on a day-to-day level in their work as like technical practitioners. Like a lot of them are very specialized in one specific area of a particular policy, you know, be it air, water, urban forestry, whatever, like they are kind of very siloed. And so, you know, I learned that like to not feel like I needed to, or that it was even possible for me to have all of the sort of like policy things that were happening, like have all of that information in my like brain context all of the time. But that like when things arise, like if you know, there was a particular like policy thing that was happening, like for example, right now in DC, the public comment period for what should happen with Anacostia soil remediation is happening. And so I learned, you know, just when things come up and it's relevant to one of the working groups that I'm a part of, then I do a deep dive at that point, and I have the analytical skills to sort of spend the time, because I have the background context from, you know, being in these like environmental policy and sustainability oriented academic programs. I know the basic context of these policies, but you always have to do a deeper dive because things change so quickly and from year to year and from administration to administration, to like, you'll always have to do a deeper dive at that moment when there's something relevant.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I actually have a question. I know a lot of students haven't put in it yet, but would you like, do you have any like class recommendations for students to like help them become more like well-rounded? I know I took community planning and sustainability, and that was helpful for like community engagement. But would you have like any recommendations for classes outside of like the requirements that would be useful?
So I will have to say, like, I didn't do undergrad at ESF, so my catalog of what the coursework is, I'll like ashamedly have to say is like I don't have a good command of like what all the coursework is. But what I will say is that I think it's the most strategic from my perspective to be as well-rounded as you can be in terms of humanities oriented classes and like technical science sort of like lab and like fieldwork experience, because I think having the most diversity of sort of experience allows you to be the most adaptive in this world where you don't necessarily know what kind of job you're gonna get. Like, even if you are very specialized and you know a thing that you're particularly like skilled at or passionate about, you know, say you're like really into sort of hydrology, right? And you become like a water scientist and you're like super jazzed about that and looking at like macroinvertebrates and studying them in waterways. But then you get a job in that field and you're not super into like dealing with people and you just want to like look at creatures in the water and that's your thing. But then you get a job with the state and a part of your work is facilitating community engagement to support the like sort of new like program measures that you have to like push forward sort of clean water measures that you have to do in terms of like environmental quality requirements. And so like community engagement and like working across different departments is like a central part of your work. And so then if you're not like don't have experience figuring out how to facilitate those things, you do the bare minimum, but then the community is really mad about not feeling like they have a clear understanding about what's going on. So you're not able to spend as much time advocating for the things that you can to actually like make the water cleaner. So, you know, that's just one example, but I think having, no matter where you fall in terms of what your interests are, like I definitely think you should play to your strengths and to what you're passionate about, but there's a middle path, I think, that makes you the most adaptive, given the fact that like you guys have a much larger class size than I came from, and it was already competitive when I graduated. So having the largest range of skill set, I think, is what can help you be the most adaptive to like finding work after you graduate.
Right. Anything else from you, Dr. Moran? Thank you for answering my question.
Yeah, no problem.
I'm sorry we're out of time, but thank you so much, Stacia. It's really great to hear from you and hear what you're up to and what it's like. And I think it was really helpful for everybody here to see the role that environmental policy can play in people's future.
It's very important. And the last thing I'll just end on is that I think from the municipal partner side, the thing that I hear the most is that like community engagement and understanding sort of the social aspects of how to do that kind of work is becoming increasingly important. And I'm sure you all hear that as students, but it really, really is true. If you don't have the social skills to be persuasive enough in making arguments for how we should manage and protect the natural resources, then it's all for want, you know? So I'll end on that. And if anyone has any sort of like wants to do a deeper dive or ask me questions about my work, like Sharon or Donnie can like share my contact information. I'm super enthusiastic about like paying it forward to students and sort of answering questions pragmatically about like what can help you in your professional path. And thanks for having me.
Thanks so much.
I hope you all stay healthy and safe.
You too.
Thank you.